Today, we're going to be going over the VBP Plus animal movement record. To start, we're going to go over how to find the record templates on the Verified Beef Production Plus website. After you've gone to verifiedbeef.ca, you'll arrive at this homepage. Find the Producer Resources tab at the top of the page. Hover over this menu, and then find Sample Records and Templates right at the top. Click on this page. Once you've arrived at the Sample Records and Templates page, scroll down to the table of records. You'll see that each record has both a template and an example. Find the record you're looking for. In this case, we're looking for the animal movement record. First, we'll click on the template PDF. You'll see that this takes us to a blank format of the animal movement record. If we go back, we can also click on the example PDF. This takes us to the same copy of the record, but with a couple examples filled in to give you an idea of what kind of information you should be filling in. Let's go back to the blank animal movement record template. You'll see that the first column on the left is date. This is the spot where we fill in the date that the animal movement is happening. For the purposes of this video, we're going to pretend that it's summertime and we're getting ready to kick out cows and bulls to our breeding pastures. We'll start with the date where we suppose we're kicking out our breeding heifers. We'll fill in the date that we're going to do this. Next, we need to fill in the individual or group ID of the group that's being moved. In this case, that's breeding heifers. The next column is the number of head that are being moved. For this example, we'll say we're moving 30 heifers. The reason for movement describes why you're moving the cattle that you are. In this case, we've already explained that we're going to be turning out these breeding heifers to pastures, so that's what we'll fill in. The premise ID column is for you to record the premise ID of the location where the cattle are being moved to. The purpose of this is having a record of where the cattle were located at any given time for traceability purposes if something is to go wrong. Finally, the comments column just allows an extra space for you to record any information that might be useful to you when looking back at your records. In this case, we'll mark the brand that's on the side of the heifers so that if something goes wrong or we need to find them, we know which heifers we're trying to look for. Next up, let's look at a couple of other examples where we might use the animal movement record. This is a good opportunity to show how records can tell a story, so we're going to continue on with the example of turning out to breeding pastures. Our next step is to turn out our bulls to breeding pastures. We'll fill in the date as before. But in this case, we want to be a little bit more specific about animal ID. We want to know which bulls we're turning out with our heifers, so we're going to write down the individual animal IDs of both bulls that we're turning out. We can fill out the rest of the columns the same way as we did before. In this case, we're only turning out 2 head, we're turning them out to pasture with the heifers, we're turning them out to the same premise ID, but in this case, they have no brand. For the next example, let's say our 2 bulls decided to get in a little scrap out on breeding pasture. So a couple days later, we need to take one of them into the vet because he got hurt. Here's how we'd fill in that record. We'll start with the date that we take the bull into the vet. Then we'll fill in the ID of the bull that we're taking in, and of course, in this case, it's just 1 head. Our reason for movement column will of course say that we're taking the bull to the vet because he got into a fight. In this case, we're not going to fill in a premise ID, partly because the vet clinic doesn't have one, but also because in this example, we're going to be turning around and bringing the bull back to the same pasture, so he's staying at the same premise ID. And lastly, in our comments column, we'll explain why we didn't list a premise ID because we brought him back home the same day. For this last example, we're going to pretend that maybe our kids wanted to take 3 of the heifers that were out to a show. Unfortunately, those fighting bulls might have left through those 3 heifers open. We'll go ahead and fill in the date, followed by the individual animal IDs of the heifers that we're taking. And we'll note that we're taking 3 head and that we're taking them to a show. Again, we won't be recording a premise ID because the show barn that we're taking them to doesn't have one, but also because we'll make a note that when we return them, they'll be moving back to the same premise ID as the one that they started at. These are 4 different examples of how you could use an animal movement record, but what they all have in common is that you're moving cattle between locations, even if just temporarily, but that there's no change of ownership occurring. Although this isn't a required record for the VBP Plus program, it is a record that adds value to your operation. It can be used to calculate days on pasture for rent, forage valuation, and days exposed. It also is a point-in-time inventory linked to a premise ID, if applicable, that can be used to access your cattle during an emergency, like a fire, where access may be controlled or if theft is suspected. We hope that these examples help illustrate how you can use the animal movement record on your own operation.